John Davison Rockefeller Sr., July 8, 1839 to May 23, 1937, was an American businessman and philanthropist. He was one of the wealthiest Americans of all time. For contemporary lists, see List of wealthiest Americans by net worth. Business magnate and philanthropist John D. Rockefeller is sometimes considered the wealthiest American in history. Comparing wealth of individuals across large spans of time is difficult, as the value of money and assets is heavily dependent on the time period. There are various methods of comparing individuals' wealth across time, including using simple inflation-adjusted totals or calculating an individual's wealth as a share of contemporary gross domestic product, GDP. For this reason, there is not one decisive ranking of the richest Americans in history. Many sources cite John D. Rockefeller, 1839 to 1937, as the richest person in the history of the United States. However, this result comes not from adjusting his wealth for inflation, but by comparing his wealth to the size of the American economy at that time. 1, 2, 3. Since the economy was relatively small during his time period, his wealth represented a larger portion of the total economy. For example, economic blogger Scott Sumner noted in 2018 that Rockefeller was worth $1.4 billion when he died in 1937, equivalent to about $24 billion in 2018 when adjusting for inflation. Meanwhile, Bill Gates in 1999 was worth nearly $150 billion in dollars adjusted to 2018. 4. Elon Musk has since surpassed John D. Rockefeller as the richest person in the history of the United States, and of modern history, according to size of wealth compared to GDP. In December 2024 his wealth reached $474 billion, 1.61% of USA's GDP at that year, compared to Rockefeller's 1.5% at the height of his wealth.
The third richest person in terms of wealth, compared to contemporary GDP, is a subject of dispute. While most sources attribute this status to Andrew Carnegie, others argue that it could be Bill Gates, Cornelius Vanderbilt I, John Jacob Astor IV, or Henry Ford. Determining the lower ranks is an even more contentious debate. Vanderbilt left a fortune worth $100 million upon his death in 1877, equivalent to $2.4 billion today. 6. As the United States became the world's leading economic power by the late 19th century, the wealthiest people in America were often also the wealthiest people in the world, and one of the richest people in modern history. Harvard Business School, retrieved June 17, 2023. Rockefeller was born into a large family in upstate New York, who moved several times before eventually settling in Cleveland, Ohio. He became an assistant bookkeeper at age 16, and went into several business partnerships beginning at age 20, concentrating his business on oil refining. Rockefeller founded the Standard Oil Company in 1870. He ran it until 1897 and remained its largest shareholder. In his retirement, he focused his energy and wealth on philanthropy, especially regarding education, medicine, higher education, and modernizing the southern United States. Rockefeller's wealth grew substantially as kerosene and gasoline became increasingly important commodities, eventually making him the richest person in the United States. By 1900, Standard Oil controlled about 90% of the nation's oil production. The company lowered production costs and expanded oil distribution through corporate and technological innovations. But it also benefited from a legal environment that enabled consolidation. Critics argue that regulatory capture played a role in facilitating its monopoly, a view reinforced by Rockefeller's reputed remark, "Competition is a sin." 7. 8. Rockefeller's company and business practices came under criticism, particularly in the writings of author Ida Tarbell. The Supreme Court ruled in 1911 that Standard Oil must be dismantled for violation of federal antitrust laws. It was broken up into 34 separate entities, which included companies that became ExxonMobil, Chevron Corporation, and others.
Early life. Rockefeller's birthplace in Richford, New York. Rockefeller was the second of 6 children born in Richford, New York, to con artist William A. Rockefeller Sr. and Eliza Davison, 23. Rockefeller had an elder sister named Lucy and 4 younger siblings, William Jr. Mary, and fraternal twins Franklin, Frank, and Francis. His father was of English and German descent, while his mother was of Ulster Scot descent. 24. One source says that some ancestors were Huguenots. The Rockefeller family, who fled to Germany from France during the reign of Louis XIV and a period of religious persecution. By the time their descendants immigrated to North America, their name had taken German form. 25. William Sr. worked first as a lumberman and then a traveling salesman. He claimed to be a botanic physician who sold elixirs, and was described by locals as Big Bill and Devil Bill. 26. Unshackled by conventional morality, he led a vagabond existence and returned to his family infrequently. 23. Throughout his life, Bill was notorious for conducting schemes. 27. In between the births of Lucy and John, Bill and his mistress and housekeeper Nancy Brown had a daughter named Clorinda, who died young. Between John and William Jr.'s births, Bill and Nancy had another daughter, named Cornelia.
Eliza was a homemaker and a devout Baptist, who struggled to maintain a semblance of stability at home, as Bill was frequently gone for extended periods. She also put up with his philandering and his double life, which included bigamy. He permanently abandoned his family around 1855 and lived with second wife, Margaret L. Allen, 29. Eliza was thrifty by nature and by necessity, and she taught her son that willful waste makes woeful. 130. John did his share of the regular household chores, and earned extra money raising turkeys, selling potatoes and candy, and eventually lending small sums of money to neighbors. 31. 32. He followed his father's advice to trade dishes for platters, and always get the better part of any deal. Bill once bragged, "I cheat my boys every chance I get. I want to make 'em sharp." However, his mother was more influential in John's upbringing and beyond, while he distanced himself further and further from his father as his life progressed. 33. He later stated, "From the beginning, I was trained to work to save and to give." 34. When he was a boy, his family moved to Moravia, New York, and to Ogo, New York, in 1851, where he attended Ogo Academy. In 1853, his family moved to Strongsville, Ohio, and he attended Cleveland Central High School, the first high school in Cleveland and the first free public high school west of the Alleghenies. Then he took a 10-week business course at Folsom's Commercial College, where he studied bookkeeping. 35. Rockefeller was a well-behaved, serious, and studious boy despite his father's absences and frequent family moves. His contemporaries described him as reserved, earnest, religious, methodical, and discreet. He was an excellent debater and expressed himself precisely. He also had a deep love of music and dreamed of it as a possible career.
Pre-Standard Oil career. As a bookkeeper, Rockefeller at age 18. In September 1855, when Rockefeller was 16, he got his first job as an assistant bookkeeper working for a small produce commission firm in Cleveland called Hewitt Tuttle. 37. He worked long hours and delighted, as he later recalled, in all the methods and systems of the office. 38. He was particularly adept at calculating transportation costs, which served him well later in his career. Much of Rockefeller's duties involved negotiating with barge canal owners, ship captains, and freight agents. In these negotiations, he learned that posted transportation rates that were believed to be fixed could be altered depending on conditions and timing of freight, and through the use of rebates to preferred shippers. Rockefeller was also given the duties of collecting debts when Hewitt instructed him to do so, instead of using his father's method of presents to collect debts. Rockefeller relied on a persistent pestering approach. 39. Rockefeller received $16 a month for his 3-month apprenticeship. During his first year, he received $31 a month, which was increased to $50 a month. His final year provided him $58 a month. 40. As a youth, Rockefeller reportedly said that his great ambitions were to make $100,000, equivalent to $337,041 in 2024 dollars, and to live 100 years. 42. Business partnership and Civil War service.
Business partnership and Civil War service. In 1859, Rockefeller went into the Produce Commission business with 2 partners, Maurice B. Clark and George W. Gardner, under Clark, Gardner and Company, and they raised $4,000, $139,985 in 2024 dollars, in capital. 43. 44. Clark initiated the idea of the partnership and offered $2,000 towards the goal. Rockefeller had only $800 saved up at the time and so borrowed $1,000 from his father, Big Bill Rockefeller, at 10% interest, 45, in their first and second years of business. Clark, Gardner and Rockefeller netted $4,400, on nearly $500,000 in business, and $17,000 worth of profit, respectively, and their profits soared with the outbreak of the American Civil War when the Union Army called for massive amounts of food and supplies. During the second year of the war, Gardner withdrew from the business, and the firm became Clark and Rockefeller, 43, 44. When the Civil War was nearing a close and with the prospect of those wartime profits ending, Clark and Rockefeller looked toward the refining of crude oil, 46, while his brother Frank fought in the Civil War. Rockefeller tended his business. He gave some money to the Union cause, as did many rich Northerners who avoided combat. "I wanted to go in the army and do my part," Rockefeller said. "But it was simply out of the question. There was no one to take my place. We were in a new business, and if I had not stayed it must have stopped, and with so many dependent on it."
Rockefeller was opposed to slavery but never joined the abolitionist cause. He voted for Abraham Lincoln in 1860 and supported the new Republican Party, 48. During the Civil War, military consumption of oil drove the price up from 35 cents a barrel in 1862 to as high as $13.75, 49. This created an oil drilling glut, with thousands of speculators attempting to make their fortunes. Most failed, but those who struck oil did not even need to be efficient. They would blow holes in the ground and gather up the oil as they could, often leading to creeks and rivers flowing with wasted oil in the place of water. 50. A market existed for the refined oil in the form of kerosene. Coal had previously been used to extract kerosene, but its tedious extraction process and high price prevented broad use. Even with the high costs of freight transportation and a government levy during the Civil War, the government levied a tax of 20 cents a gallon on refined oil. Profits on the refined product were large. The price of the refined oil in 1863 was around $13 a barrel, with a profit margin of around $5 to $8 a barrel. The capital expenditures for a refinery at that time were small, around $1,000 to $1,500 and requiring only a few men to operate. 51. In this environment of a wasteful boom, the partners switched from foodstuffs to oil, building an oil refinery in 1863 in the Flats, then Cleveland's burgeoning industrial area. The refinery was directly owned by Andrews, Clark and Company, which was composed of Clark and Rockefeller, chemist Samuel Andrews, and M.B. Clark's two brothers. The commercial oil business was then in its infancy. Whale oil had become too expensive for the masses, and a cheaper, general-purpose lighting fuel was needed. 52. While other refineries would keep the 60% of oil product that became kerosene, but dump the other 40% in rivers and massive sludge piles. 53. Rockefeller used the gasoline to fuel the refinery, and sold the rest as lubricating oil, petroleum jelly and paraffin wax, and other byproducts. Tar was used for paving, naphtha shipped to gas plants. 54. Likewise, Rockefeller's refineries hired their own plumbers, cutting the cost of pipe laying in half. Barrels that cost $2.50 each ended up only 96 cents when Rockefeller bought the wood and had them built for himself.
In February 1865, in what was later described by oil industry historian Daniel Yergin as a critical action, Rockefeller bought out the Clark brothers for $72,500, equivalent to $1,041,000 in 2024 dollars, at auction and established the firm of Rockefeller and Andrews. Rockefeller said, "It was the day that determined my career." 55. He was well positioned to take advantage of post-war prosperity and the great expansion westward fostered by the growth of railroads and an oil-fueled economy. He borrowed heavily, reinvested profits, adapted rapidly to changing markets, and fielded observers to track the quickly expanding industry. 56. Beginning in the oil business. In 1866, William Rockefeller Jr., John's brother, built another refinery in Cleveland and brought John into the partnership. In 1867, Henry Morrison Flagler became a partner, and the firm of Rockefeller, Andrews and Flagler was established. By 1868, with Rockefeller continuing practices of borrowing and reinvesting profits, controlling costs, and using refineries' waste, The company owned 2 Cleveland refineries and a marketing subsidiary in New York. It was the largest oil refinery in the world. 57-58. Rockefeller, Andrews and Flagler was the predecessor of the Standard Oil Company.
Founding and early growth. Rockefeller c. 1872, shortly after founding Standard Oil. By 1865, Cleveland was one of the 5 main refining centers in the U.S., besides Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, upstate New York, and the region in northwestern Pennsylvania where most of the oil originated. By 1869, there was triple the kerosene refining capacity than needed to supply the market, and the capacity remained in excess for many years. 60. On January 10, 1870, Rockefeller abolished the partnership of Rockefeller, Andrews and Flagler, 61, co-founding Standard Oil of Ohio. Continuing to apply his work ethic and efficiency, Rockefeller quickly expanded the company to be the most profitable refiner in Ohio. Likewise, it became one of the largest shippers of oil and kerosene in the country. The railroads competed fiercely for traffic, and in an attempt to create a cartel to control freight rates, formed the South Improvement Company, offering special deals to bulk customers, like Standard Oil, outside the main oil centers. The cartel offered preferential treatment as a high-volume shipper, which included not just steep discounts or rebates of up to 50% for their product, but rebates for the shipment of competing products. 62. Rockefeller in 1875. By then, he shaved off his sideburns, leaving his iconic mustache. Share of the Standard Oil Company, issued May 1, 1878, 63. Part of this scheme was the announcement of sharply increased freight charges. This touched off a firestorm of protest from independent oil well owners, including boycotts and vandalism, which led to the discovery of Standard Oil's part in the deal. A major New York refiner, Charles Pratt and Company, headed by Charles Pratt and Henry H. Rogers, led the opposition to this plan, and railroads soon backed off. Pennsylvania revoked the cartel's charter, and non-preferential rates were restored for the time being. 64. While competitors may have been unhappy, Rockefeller's efforts did bring American consumers cheaper kerosene and other oil byproducts. Before 1870, oil light was only for the wealthy, provided by expensive whale oil. During the next decade, kerosene became commonly available to the working and middle classes. 53. Undeterred, though vilified for the first time by the press, Rockefeller continued with his self-reinforcing cycle of buying the least efficient competing refiners, improving the efficiency of his operations, pressing for discounts on oil shipments, undercutting his competition, making secret deals, raising investment pools, and buying rivals out.
In less than 4 months in 1872, in what was later known as the Cleveland Conquest, or the Cleveland Massacre, Standard Oil absorbed 22 of its 26 Cleveland competitors. 65. Eventually, even his former antagonists, Pratt and Rogers, saw the futility of continuing to compete against Standard Oil. In 1874, they made a secret agreement with Rockefeller to be acquired. Citation needed. Standard Oil Trust Certificate 1896. Pratt and Rogers became Rockefeller's partners. Rogers, in particular, became one of Rockefeller's key men in the formation of the Standard Oil Trust. Pratt's son, Charles Millard Pratt, became Secretary of Standard Oil. For many of his competitors, Rockefeller had merely to show them his books so they could see what they were up against and then make them a decent offer. If they refused his offer, he told them he would run them into bankruptcy and then cheaply buy up their assets at auction. However, he did not intend to eliminate competition entirely. In fact, his partner Pratt said of that accusation, "Competitors we must have. If we absorb them, it surely will bring up another." 53. Instead of wanting to eliminate them, Rockefeller saw himself as the industry's savior, an angel of mercy, absorbing the weak and making the industry as a whole stronger, more efficient, and more competitive. 66. Standard was growing horizontally and vertically. It added its own pipelines, tank cars, and home delivery network. It kept oil prices low to stave off competitors, made its products affordable to the average household, and, to increase market penetration, sometimes sold below cost.
It developed over 300 oil-based products from tar to paint to petroleum jelly to chewing gum. By the end of the 1870s, Standard was refining over 90% of the oil in the U.S. 67. Rockefeller had already become a millionaire. $1 million is equivalent to $33 million, 41, in 2024 dollars. 68. He instinctively realized that orderliness would only proceed from centralized control of large aggregations of plant and capital, with the one aim of an orderly flow of products from the producer to the consumer. That orderly, economic, efficient flow is what we now, many years later, call vertical integration. I do not know whether Mr. Rockefeller ever used the word integration. I only know he conceived the idea. A Standard Oil of Ohio successor of Rockefeller, 60. Standard Oil Refinery No. 1 in Cleveland, Ohio, 1897.
In 1877, Standard clashed with Thomas A. Scott, the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, Standard's chief hauler. Rockefeller envisioned pipelines as an alternative transport system for oil and began a campaign to build and acquire them. The railroad, seeing Standard's incursion into the transportation and pipeline fields, struck back and formed a subsidiary to buy and build oil refineries and pipelines. Standard countered, held back its shipments, and, with the help of other railroads, started a price war that dramatically reduced freight payments and caused labor unrest. Rockefeller prevailed and the railroad sold its oil interests to Standard. In the aftermath of that battle, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania indicted Rockefeller in 1879 on charges of monopolizing the oil trade, starting an avalanche of similar court proceedings in other states and making a national issue of Standard Oil's business practices. Rockefeller was under great strain during the 1870s and 1880s when he was carrying out his plan of consolidation and integration and being attacked by the press. He complained that he could not stay asleep most nights. Rockefeller later commented, "All the fortune that I have made has not served to compensate me for the anxiety of that period."